back to EDH Deck Building. I'm your host, Demo, and this is Firja, Judge of Valor. When I saw this card spoiled, casting 2 spells each turn is definitely not an ability that you are going to see in Orzhov colors. Obviously, the comparison I made was Jorian, which is definitely the kind of colors you want to be doing stuff like that in. So I thought, okay, for sure they're going to have support for this. If they're going to be doing this, then they're going to have black and white cards that are going to be supporting this sort of playstyle. But not really. Now that the set is completely spoiled, they only had a couple. Infernal Pet and Clarion Spirit really are the only two that I think are even worth putting in this deck. And I did put them in this deck, but other than that, we can't build our deck around those 2 cards, right? We need something else. So what are we going to do? When I'm looking at Firja, I'm thinking, we want that card value of looking at those top cards of our libraries. I've already seen someone doing a deck, I don't know if it was a deck tech, but coming up with the idea of, hey, let's play a graveyard recursion deck and we will, because you're dumping lots of cards in your graveyard, sure. The only problem is, in order to dump those cards in your graveyard, you need to be casting 2 spells a turn, right? If you're not casting 2 spells a turn, then you're not going to be using that ability ever. So I just think that trying to do both of those things, casting 2 spells every turn and filling your graveyard and then trying to get things out of your graveyard, is just too much. So for me, the graveyard thing, I'm sort of just saying, to heck with it. We're just not going to do that at all. When I started building this deck, I just thought, you know what, I'm just going to abandon the whole idea of putting it in your graveyard and just say, you know what, we're going to cast 2 spells on a turn as much as we can and get the card advantage as much as we can. So what are we going to do with that? Well, what I decided with this deck is a funny idea that I've been having. Again, this is another idea that I had in the back of my brain for a long, long time, and this seemed like a good opportunity for it. Through my travels in this format, I have noticed that, when you think of counterspells, you think of blue. Blue is essentially the counterspell color. There are surprisingly a lot of counterspells in white, and there's actually a couple in black as well. So I thought, why don't we play this funny deck where we are countering spells, basically a control deck, a white-black control deck. Let's play a control deck without blue. You don't see that very often. It's fun. It's interesting. I love it. After I playtested this deck a few times, it actually works. It's not just goofy. It actually works pretty good. So starting out, Rebuff the Wicked. This spell, I don't think this spell's quirky at all. 1 mana to counter a spell that targets a permanent you control. This goes in all my mono white decks. This goes in a lot of my decks. I put this in a lot of my decks. Especially if you have a commander that is problematic that people are going to want off the table. And again, you're not playing blue, obviously. This is just a great card. 1 mana. So that's in there. Mana Tithe. Sure, why not, right? It is a counter spell. And there can be some times, especially if you think about the big stuff, right? When people cast and expropriate, they're probably going to tap out to do it. And for you to mana tithe that, what a great feeling that is. Withering Boon. Yes, black counterspell. Pay 3 life, counter target summon spell. So, of course, that means a creature spell. Back in the day, they used to call it a summon spell. But so you're going to pay 2 mana and counter a creature spell. Great. Lapse of Certainty. This is probably the one that people are mostly familiar with. It is just a straight up white counterspell. Puts it on top of their library, but that's fine. It still can help us out quite a bit. And then Imp's Mischief. This isn't a counterspell per se, but it is a redirect, which is just as good in a lot of cases. So just a lot of really neat, interesting, cool cards that we can this is the kind of deck you're going to play and everyone's going to be like, what's going on over there? It's really jaws are going to be hitting the floor. And so why don't we also throw Darkness in there, right? The Black Fog. This isn't, I'm not throwing these cards in just because, hey, it's goofy and it's fun. This is actually the strategy that we're going with, right? The strategy we're going with is I'm going to cast a Darkness on my opponent's turn for 1 mana, right? It's only 1 mana. And then I'm going to also cast a Path to Exile, right? So if I'm going to Darkness on their turn because I want to prevent that, Craterhoof attack, or if I'm going to Mana Tithe that Expropriate, then on their end step, right, we're mostly going to be playing on our opponent's turns here. So on their end step, I'll go okay, well, I already cast a spell this turn, so I just have to cast one more, and then I can get that Firja effect, right? And get something in my hand. So that's when I'll go, okay, well, I got a path in my hand, I might as well use it then. This is the time to do it, right? I'm going to hang on to it until I've cast a spell, right? I've already cast a Mana Tithe, so now I'm going to follow up with a path, and then I get that 2 spells per turn, right? So doing this, and again, we're playing a control style of deck. We're going to be doing not a lot of stuff on our turn, and obviously we're going to have a lot of cheap spells too. So I went through and found a bunch of cards that were cheap and also had cantrips and also were, I mean, obviously helpful and useful, but also we wanted to have stuff that we didn't necessarily have to target or have conditions for. We just wanted to be able to cast them just if we wanted to get that second spell, right? So Shelter, for example. Shelter is a good card and it has a cantrip. Everyone plays this in their feather decks, but also we can just cast it, right? If we've cast a Mana Tithe or something on a turn, or a Darkness, and we're getting to the end step and we want that second spell trigger, we can just throw a Shelter out there. We get to draw a card off of the Shelter and we get the Firja trigger. I mean, that's pretty good value. Scout's Warning, this is another card that it's a cantrip, so it's just going to replace itself. It's going to get us that Firja trigger, and also we can just use this. This is a good one for, even if we haven't Mana Tithed or done anything in a turn, we're going to cast Scout's Warning. That's our first spell. So let's say it's our opponent's end step right before our turn. We got a bunch of mana open. We haven't countered anything or killed anything. Okay, we'll cast Scout's Warning. So that's spell number 1. We get a cantrip, so it replaces itself, and then we cast a creature, any creature, right? Whatever we happen to have in our hand, right? We got a Solemn Simulacrum, then we cast that. The Solemn Simulacrum is the second spell that turn, right? We're doing this all in our opponent's end step. So we cast the Solemn Simulacrum, we get the Firja trigger. Cling to Dust, just this is just value. It's 1 mana, so we can just quickly cast it, exile something out of someone's graveyard. It can cantrip. And then also, like, Cling to Dust can do it all on its own, so I can cast it, then do it, escape it again from the graveyard to cast it again, so I can get those 2 cast triggers just out of 1 card. Debt of Loyalty is just a card that again, we're putting all these goofy sort of, gotcha cards in this deck, so why not put this in there? Again, it's an instant. We can do it. This can be another situation where someone board wipes and we can use this to save our Firja if we want to, because we can just regenerate it. But it's really funny when you steal someone's creature with this, that they're not going to see it coming. And then some flash creatures, Aven Mind Sensor, Opposition Agent, both are great. We are playing a controlling style, so keeping our opponents from tutoring is going to be fantastic. And again, we flash it in, and we have something else. If we've done something else on the turn, or if we want to do something else, we engineer it so that we're casting 2 spells on a turn as much as possible. Sigrid, God Favored, another card that, it's got flash, so I threw it in there. We do need some creatures in this deck. There's only 10 creatures in the deck, so I tried to put a few in with flash that we can just throw in whenever we want, or we can just throw them in to save our lives, because we are going to be playing a control sort of stand back. I don't want to say pillow fort, maybe a little bit of that. Since we're on the subject, I did put No Mercy in the deck. This is a fantastic card. Used to get played all the time. It just keeps people from attacking you. Ghostly Prison, obviously a card that keeps people from attacking you. We were going to be standing back and not doing much, and our deck, I think, comes off a little goofy, so I don't think that's going to make us a target. So I think we'll be okay, but having these effects is great. Reverence is one that doesn't get played almost ever. Creatures with power 2 or less just can't attack you. It's only little creatures, but it can really save on the damage. And then a few other tricks to try to get those, 2 spells per turn, because we're not always going to be doing stuff on other people's turns. We can do that effect on our turn as well, right? This is each turn, right? So on our turn we can do it, and then we can do it on the opponent's turn and the next opponent's turn. So we want to do it as much as possible. Yahenni's Expertise is, first of all, it's great because it's -3, so it's not going to kill our Firja, so that works good. But it's cast 2 spells. This on its own casts 2 spells. We cast it, and then we get to cast another spell for free. So that just triggers our Firja on its own. I put a couple suspend cards in here, again, because the suspend cards, when you remove the last counter, it casts itself. So we want some cards that are going to cast themselves for free. So this is a really goofy one. Pathesis. I don't even know how to say it. Another card that, this is a card I just want to throw in there because it's kind of goofy and I've been wanting to play it for a long time. It's insanely expensive, right? 7 mana. We're never ever going to do that. We're always going to cast it for its suspend, I would imagine. It suspends for 2 and it just sits there. And then when it goes off, that's 1 spell we've cast a turn. And then we cast another one, right? Chronomatic Escape, another one. This one's just going to keep going. So it's going to cast and go back into exile and come back. And so that's another spell. And again, because we are playing a little bit of a control, Pillow 40 type of deck, this is going to be great in that. And then Mox Amber, we can just cast our commander. You just keep this in your hand basically, right? Until you cast Firja. We cast Firja, then we cast Mox Amber, and the Firja trigger happens right away. As soon as we play her, we cast Mox Amber and we get that trigger immediately. Can't use Mox Amber without her anyway, right? So you're just going to keep it in your hand until you cast her. And then since we're playing a Pillow 40 type deck, I figured, Approach of the Second Sun was a great win condition for this deck. I don't put this in a lot of decks. And, to be quite honest, we don't have a ton of win cons in this deck other than just attacking with our creatures. So I put this in here, and it's particularly good because of Firja's ability. Remember, we're digging to the top, through the top of our deck. We're going to look at the top 3 cards. So when you cast Approach of the Second Sun, first of all, you can get to Approach of the Second Sun really quickly. Digging through your deck that quickly, you get to the cards you want really, really quickly. And Approach of the Second Sun, once we cast it, it's going to go 7th from the top, right? And then basically we're, like 2 turns later, we can cast it again, or 1 turn. If we can get 2 Firja triggers, on opponents' turns, we'll get it the very next turn, right? So we're going to get it back real quickly. But that's pretty much, that's the deck. And then, because we are playing a control style, you can pretty much figure out the rest, right? We're going to have our typical removal spells. And of course, black and white is the best for that. All the best removal spells are in black and white. We got Despark, Anguished Unmaking. We'll be able to hang back and just keep people at bay. We're not doing anything too scary. There are some people who just hate that Pillow Fort style and are going to come after you just for that reason. But, we have answers for that. Thematic Compass is another great card that is it's going to get us lands early in the game, and then it turns into a Maze of Ith, right? I like Birth of Meletus, because Birth of Meletus is going to get us a land, but also get us an 0/4 wall, so we can have a blocker in play. And then I'm going to name a couple removal spells here that sort of go unnoticed. Epic Downfall, I love this card. It doesn't get played nearly enough. 2 mana to exile a creature. Oh no, it's only a big creature? Whatever will we do, right? Like, I can't believe this card doesn't get played more. It only doesn't hit 2 or less. Anything converted mana cost 3 or greater, it hits. That's like almost everything. There's very few creatures that this doesn't hit, and you're exiling a creature for 2 mana. I can't believe this card doesn't get played more. And then Phyrexian Scriptures. This is another one. Phyrexian Scriptures can essentially be a Dune Blast, right? And Dune Blast costs 7, right? So, assuming your opponents don't have a bunch of artifact creatures, I guess it's not very good then. But this comes into play, puts a +1/+1 counter on our Firja, because we're not playing a lot of creatures, right? The Phyrexian Scriptures is great in any deck where you don't have a lot of creatures. So it comes into play, you put a +1/+1 counter on our Firja. She becomes an artifact, so I guess that makes her a little easier to kill. It doesn't really matter, because we're going to wipe the board anyway, right? So, either we wipe the board and kill everything, or we wipe the board and she stays alive. If we just cast Toxic Deluge, then she's going to die anyway. So why not at least play Phyrexian Scriptures, and maybe we'll keep her alive. And then, the last ability, exile all cards from all opponents' graveyards. That's fantastic. And then a couple more things. Elixir of Immortality I put in this deck. This is another card that used to get played all the time. I guess because people just don't want to get milled. But we're putting it in our deck because we really, there can be a situation where we're digging through our deck really quickly and dumping it in our graveyard. So we just want to be kind of careful with that. We might need, there might be a situation where we might have to shuffle our graveyard into our library. And Gilded Lotus, again, another card that you don't see in EDH anymore. It used to get played, like everyone had it in their deck. We're going to put it in this deck specifically because we can cast it. Again, we can cast Gilded Lotus, and because it's untapped 3 mana, we cast it, and then immediately we can tap it to cast another spell, right? So we're going to get those 2 spells in a turn. Yeah, that's pretty much my Firja deck. This deck is, honestly, I didn't have high hopes when I saw her at first because I just thought that ability wasn't great for black and white. And even when I came up with this goofy idea of black and white control, black and white counterspells, I thought, it's goofy, why not? It actually works a lot better than I thought. It's actually a really fun deck to play. So that is my Firja deck. Hope you enjoy. Thanks for tuning in.